I read from John, the 8th chapter. Early in the morning, Jesus returned to the temple. All the people gathered around him, and he sat down and taught them. The legal experts and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Placing her in the center of the group, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law of Moses, he commanded us to stone women like this. What do you say?" They said this to test him because they wanted a reason to bring an accusation against him. Jesus bent down and he wrote on the ground with his finger. They continued to question him, so he finally stood up and replied, "Whoever has not sinned should throw the first stone." Bending down again, he wrote on the ground. Those who heard him went away, one by one, beginning with the eldest. Finally, only Jesus and the woman were left in the middle of the crowd. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Sometimes there are coincidences that happen that seem to have purpose at just the right moment. One of those coincidences occurred just a couple of days ago for me. I went to the mailbox on the afternoon of Ash Wednesday and found in the mailbox a magazine from Fuller Theological Seminary, which is currently one of the most significant and influential seminaries in the United States. It's a West Coast seminary, whose primary campus is located in Pasadena, California. The mail carrier delivered the magazine to the wrong address. But being a student of theology and being interested in what's happening in the evolving landscape of theological education, I decided to sit down and read the magazine. I began with the opening article. It was an article written by the president, Mark Laberton. This was the first paragraph in his article. Labels may be necessary, but they seldom seem adequate. When we use labels, our minds and spirits easily give way to stereotyping and reductionism. But since we can't give up our labels, it's important from time to time to examine them and to make the labels as clear as possible to distinguish what we mean and what we don't mean. I thought to myself, what on earth is he saying? Are labels necessary? Are they? We can't give them up? Really? Isn't that part of our problem these days? We label people, or people label us. Most of us have either labeled ourselves or someone has placed a label on us that is in a little box called ideology or politics or theological persuasion. And then we put a label on it. There's stereotyping and reductionism that's done all the time. And there's nothing right about it. Labels tend to polarize people. It seemed to me as I was reading that opening paragraph, the president of the seminary was trying to justify labeling people. I disagreed with him. Because very few of us, very few, fit in a box that can be labeled easily. If you were with us on Ash Wednesday, you heard me talk about questions and how that questions are actually more important than the answers. Because questions keep us searching and exploring and digging deeper and thinking and testing, particularly as it relates to our faith. Every person who calls themselves Christian ought to know what they believe, why they believe it, and what they're going to do as a result of their belief. Take, for example, the question that I've raised for us to consider today. Was Jesus progressive? I believe it's an important question. But please don't do me the disservice of assuming that I am making a political statement with the question, because I'm not. By definition, a progressive is someone who is an advocate for progress. They believe that continuous improvement and reform is needed and possible. In the British dictionary, progressive means to favor or promote reform that will improve the lot of the majority of people. Well, any student of the New Testament would minimally consider Jesus to be a reformer. He was Jewish, right? He was Jewish by both faith and practice. But Jesus challenged his tradition. He challenged the social and economic structures within the community where he lived. He questioned the traditions in the temple where he attended. He cast a new vision for the people of faith. Jesus was a student of the law. Home and synagogue school combined to teach him all about the traditions of their faith. He grew in wisdom and grace enough to be called a teacher of the faith. And when he taught, he often would use this phrase, "You have heard it said." And then he would remind the listener of what their tradition really said. But then he would say this phrase, "But I say unto you." And suddenly a new interpretation of the Jewish customs or traditions would emerge. You have heard it said, but I say unto you. The law says we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I say unto you, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus taught his followers to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to give your possessions to the poor, so that you will have treasures in heaven. When you have a feast, he taught, invite the poor and the lame and the blind, so that you will be blessed. Do not judge. Do not judge, lest you too be judged. Even a cursory reading of the New Testament would convince a reader that Jesus was a person committed to the equality of all people. He was a reformer. He did not make a distinction between Jew and Gentile, male or female, poor or rich, ill or well. He treated everybody with love and care and compassion and acceptance. He stood for the social justice of the poor and the marginalized. He was a peacemaker. He taught his followers that there is a way through conflict to resolution. Jesus was someone who stood against greed and the entitlement attitudes of people. You see, it's impossible, isn't it? It's impossible to read the gospel without seeing clearly that Jesus was indeed a reformer. And if he was a reformer, then he was also progressive. After all, Jesus was a catalyst for change. He was a voice for progress, a voice for forward movement. The status quo is what offended him most. Jesus was a person committed to reform, not with just words, but with actions. Jesus was progressive. Early one morning, as the story goes, Jesus was teaching in the temple. He'd already stirred up the scribes and the Pharisees, who were the religious establishment of his day. They had heard his teachings. They were perturbed by them. They thought he had incredible audacity to teach the way he did, and then, of all things, to heal people of their diseases and cast out demons and perform miracles. The message of Jesus was meeting the people at their point of need, and the Pharisees didn't like that. His popularity was growing, and the Pharisees were getting nervous. Who does he think he is? We have our customs, we have our traditions, we have the law of Moses. How dare he teach about love and acceptance? And so the scribes and the Pharisees set a trap. They knew the law of Moses. And they went to a person, wouldn't you like to know the rest of the story of how it happened, who had been caught in adultery. Women were the ones who suffered the consequences, but I've always wondered, where's the guy, for heaven's sake? Being caught in adultery generally takes two, right? So when the Pharisees brought the woman to Jesus and placed her in the center of his teaching circle, they said, the law says we're supposed to stone her. What do you say? Jesus knelt down and he began writing on the ground with his finger. Don't you wonder what he might have been writing? Do you think he was just doodling? Playing in the dirt? I doubt it. It wasn't his way. I wonder if he might have been writing words like love or mercy or forgiveness. Or maybe that phrase, do not judge, lest you too be judged. The Pharisees demanded a verbal answer from Jesus. They wanted to hear something that they could judge to be blasphemy so that they could get rid of him. They'd had enough of this love and mercy and grace stuff. They wanted Jesus to simply go away. I can almost imagine the scene, can't you? There were the Pharisees, standing righteously in the temple courts with rocks in their hands. And he stood and he said, "Those of you who are without sin, you can cast the first stone." And then Jesus went back to writing on the ground. You can almost hear the rocks dropping on the ground, can't you? Soon there was nobody there. Jesus asked the woman, "Where are your accusers? Has no one stayed to condemn you?" And I'm sure with incredible tears of relief, the woman said, Nobody's here. And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." There are lots of Pharisees in the church today. I don't know. I doubt it, but I don't know. Maybe there's even a Pharisee or two here this morning. Over the years, the Pharisees have gotten more subtle with their judgments. I don't know where they got the idea that God died and left them in charge. But the Pharisees today have decided what is acceptable and non-acceptable sins. Pharisees have stereotyped. They have labeled lightweight, medium weight, and heavyweight sins. Pharisees don't even look in the mirror when they pass judgment on somebody else. Seems to me Pharisees are still ready to stone people who have been labeled as different than they. But the stones that we throw today may be not literal, but they would kill just as if they were throwing the rocks that they threw in the days of Jesus. You see, gossip and bullying and abuse have destroyed people. Displaying bad attitude toward a person because they're poor or uneducated is just as demeaning as hurling a rock at them. Posting ugly or inappropriate messages about someone on Facebook is stoning them. We stone someone when we are silent or look the other way when a person is mistreated because of the color of their skin. We stone a person when we hurl hurtful comments about their sexual orientation. Here it is. Here it is, 21 centuries after Jesus, and Pharisees are still eager and ready to stone people that they have determined to be sinners. Jesus said, "You who are without sin, cast the first stone." So I have made it easy. Here's a basket. In the basket are some stones. Anybody here without sin? Don't forget to pick up your stone on your way out. Amen. Isn't that a wonderful hymn? It takes us from the very beginning of God's creation right up to where you and I live. You see, we're still writing the 29th chapter of the book of Acts. We still are. And what we do with the power and the inspiration that God has given to us and called us to do in our world is incredibly important. Don't forget my class tonight. We're meeting at 5 o'clock. Come join us if you can. Your pastor could feel a little left out because everybody else's class is full, except mine. So come join us, okay? And don't forget the breakfast downstairs and enjoy that time of fellowship as well. So go forth in your day, surrounded by the grace and mercy and peace of God, and be instruments of peace. Amen.